Neither does anyone else. She is sometimes known as a charity scammer. We've heard her called an MI5 operative. We've also heard people praise her for being a dedicated children's rights campaigner. She's certainly been very much linked in with the Hampstead hoax. So who is she really? Today we're going to find out, so stick around. First, a little bit of background about Belinda. She was raised in Buckinghamshire, where her family is very well established. She was raised in a beautiful, large, old country mansion, the sort of place where people like to go on hunting parties and that sort of thing. And she currently lives in a rather nice house in Highgate, which has been known for some years now as the Highgate Hub, probably because that is where she has hosted many, many, many meetings and gatherings and one thing and another of people who believe in all sorts of different conspiracy theories in the UK. This began probably in the early 2000s and to our knowledge has never really stopped. It's also rumored that she has a kind of a bunker in her basement where she has beds set aside for people who like to come and stay with her, often people who are on the run or looking for or desperate for a place to live for one reason or another. We know she has been a landlady to the MI5 defector David Shaler and his girlfriend at the time, Annie Machen. We also know that she was the host of Charlotte Ward, who would later go on to be very well known and much disliked, I would have to say, as Jackie Farmer, the author of the Hampstead research blog. And there's more about Jackie Farmer earlier on in this series, so if you want to find out more about that, you can check out that video. The first time we ran across Belinda in any kind of public sense was in the late 1990s when she was involved in the charity Iran Aid. Now, Iran Aid ran into some trouble with the Charities Commission, and it was reprimanded on account of its what they called heavy-handed fundraising tactics, which generally seemed to involve either having sweet young things on the corner with pictures of, beheaded people and people living in horrible conditions in Iran, or having identified potential donors. They would sometimes send around essentially two or three thugs who would come and try to extort money. And I don't think the word extortion is too strong here. I've spoken to someone who had this happen to them. And they would try to get them to donate very, very large sums that they usually couldn't afford, and then literally continue pursuing them for further funding, literally for dozens of years afterwards. So in 1998, the Charities Commission found out from the charities bankers that money was being diverted from the charity to some kind of suspicious locations where it probably was not supposed to be going. In fact, there was the understanding that we have from reports at the time is that they were siphoning off about £5 million per year to an account in Germany, and then from there no one knew where the money was going. That's a bit of a problem with a charity. You're not supposed to be able to do that. And so when the Charities Commission came to investigate, the Iran Aid staff actually barricaded themselves in the office and refused to allow the investigators in to have a look at the books. And by the time the barricade kind of came down and they decided, okay, fine, you can come in and have a look, there was a mysterious fire. Can you imagine that? And all of the records were burned, and there was never any record of exactly what had happened. Now, we do have an article on the blog that you might want to look at for further information about this. In the article, we talk about who the MEK really are and why it was probably not such a great thing for Iran Aid to actually be funneling off its funds in that way, and how Belinda seems to have had a long and somewhat enduring relationship with the MEK and some of its members, past or present. So there's more on that on the blog, and I'll leave the link in the box below. One last thing about the MEK is that Belinda and her husband have been seen outside the Iranian embassy handing out leaflets, pro-MEK leaflets to passers-by and doing various protests. Now, I don't know how current those are. The last one I saw was probably from 7, 8, 9 years ago, but it's an interesting connection nevertheless. And again, there's more information about this on the blog. Now, in the early 2000s, Belinda came across a person named Lloyd Pye. Lloyd Pye was a novelist and former scriptwriter from the U.S., and he had somehow come into possession of a skull which looked like the skull of a child, and it had an extremely enlarged and very rounded cranium, which matched many people's ideas of what an alien might look like if an alien had come to Earth. This was called the Star Child skull, and basically Mr. Pye turned it into that was his business, was running around the countryside and all over the world really, flogging this skull and claiming that it was evidence that the aliens had previously, or might possibly still, walk among us. Belinda picked up on this and became, guess what, the treasurer. Yay, more money through Belinda's hands, through a company which she called Cognoscence. And apparently she set this up in about 2002 to take donations which were going to be used to do proper DNA testing on the Star Child skull. Sadly for the true believers, however, the DNA testing revealed that the skull was that of a child, a human child, with hydrocephalus, who had probably died of that illness because the fluid presses on the brain, causes brain damage, and eventually premature death. So very, very sad, but not an alien. That didn't stop Belinda, however, and she continued trying to flog this until the about 2008, 2009, I believe, is the last we heard of that. I suppose the novelty had worn off and people had begun to get wind of the DNA testing, and it was no longer a profitable thing for her. The problem with anything that Belinda flogs, however, is that it's never really clear whether she truly believes it or simply sees the commercial potential in an idea. She does have a very good eye for the things in the world of conspiracy theories and pseudoscience that will catch the imagination of those who are interested in that sort of thing and draw in the pounds. By about 2010, the conspiracy community in the UK had worked out that the next big thing was going to be child sexual abuse. This seems to have come on the coattails of some of the very, very strange allegations made by David Icke, and everyone was latching on, including Belinda. The 2010 march, which these marches of child sexual abuse survivors had originated in London with Shiva Burton, in 2010 were completely co-opted and taken over by the conspiracy community, including Belinda, who basically shoved Shiva out of the limelight and took over to promote their own particular agenda. And Belinda, of course, was right there among them. So that began an interesting career for her, where she began to talk about the welfare of children and so forth, but not from the usual perspective. You'd think that a person who believed so passionately, as she claims to, in the rights of children would want the best for the child. But what she seems to want is for parents, no matter how bad they are, no matter what kind of damage they do to their children, she wants the parents to be able to maintain control over them, because she has an idea that the social services in the UK in particular, I don't know about the rest of the world, but she focuses on the UK, so will I, that the social services steal children for the purposes of sex trafficking. and other nasty things. And it seems to tie into the whole David Icke idea of children being bought and sold for satanic abuse purposes, that sort of thing. So that was Belinda's next big thing. And this is, I think, where we really begin to see her kind of coming into her own and in a way making the pathway to the Hampstead hoax almost inevitable. About a year after the child sexual abuse rally, Wilfred Wong, who is known to many people as a strong believer and promoter of the idea of satanic ritual abuse, held an invitation-only meeting at Westminster under the auspices of the MP that he was then working for, Russell Brown. And Belinda was one of the invitees, as was Robert Greene, who would later go on to front the Holly Gregg hoax, spent time in prison because of his promotion of that hoax, and recently actually died. I'm very sorry for his family for that. And Belinda and Robert Greene began working together shortly after that on the Holly Gregg hoax, and she began to travel up to Scotland and really kind of help promote and get that particular hoax more coverage, I suppose, than it might otherwise have had. One very interesting video that I found featured Lou Collins interviewing Belinda McKenzie. In the interview, Belinda actually says that she spoke with Holly, who by this time is a young adult, and Holly had told her that, oh yes, she very much enjoyed being hiked around the countryside as a traveling exhibit, and that she more than anything, she wanted to see the people who had done the sexual abuse to her caught and punished, and that somehow, even as a child with Down syndrome and very, very limited mental capacity, she was somehow able to keep the secret of her sexual abuse from her mother and everyone else around her for 14 years because she was afraid of retribution from her father. Just dwell on that for a minute. How plausible is it really that a child with that kind of mental capacity would be able to foresee those kinds of consequences and make a plan and keep quiet about something for 14 years until her mother suddenly, basically went mental and decided that she had been sexually abused? Anyway, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because the Lou Collins interview was in 2012. In 2011, Belinda met and became quite close colleagues with Sabine McNeill. Now, Sabine originally had been involved in a bunch of different cases mostly involving monetary issues. That seemed to be her major interest. But when she met Belinda, the two of them were like nitro and glycerin, and they had the idea that they would get involved in helping people in the family courts, and that the family courts were a very deeply unfair place because what goes on there is kept confidential. Now, if you've ever been to family court, you'd understand why this is. Most cases involve very personal issues, things like divorce or childcare or what has happened to your child. Your child may have been abused or various things like that. You don't want that material made public, and yet Belinda and Sabine, rather than seeing this as the hallmark of a humane system that keeps people's privacy paramount, saw it as a hurdle to be overcome. And interestingly, they hit upon the idea of becoming McKenzie Friends. Now, neither of them had any paralegal training, and in fact, they had very little experience in the courts, and I've been told by a person who claims to have done a lot of their work for them that, in fact, neither of them knew their arse from their elbow when it came to actually what to do or say in a courtroom. And I've actually seen evidence of that. I've seen Belinda really muck things up in court. And you'd think that if someone were that much of an expert in the court process, they would actually know things like, don't violate reporting restrictions. But we'll get to that in a bit. Anyhow, so Belinda and Sabine met and got together in 2011, and they started the Association of McKenzie Friends. This was a clever dodge. What a McKenzie friend does, and a McKenzie friend has nothing to do with Belinda McKenzie. Just so you know, a McKenzie friend is a legal term, and it refers to a person who is allowed to come and sit beside a litigant in person, in other words, a person without a lawyer, in court, and pass them documents, help them sort of formulate their responses, give them quiet advice about what they might do or say next, and essentially be there for moral support. So it dates back to a case, McKenzie v. McKenzie, which was a divorce case in which someone wanted to have someone in that capacity with them. McKenzie Friends can actually be a very helpful part of the family court system if they're used correctly. However, Belinda and Sabine had no intention ever of using them correctly. What they wanted to do was to use the McKenzie friend model to infiltrate the family court system. Now, why would Belinda and Sabine be so interested in infiltrating the family court system? It has to do with pushing their agenda, which is that no matter how terrible a family might be, the family is always the best place for the child. And this goes back to their paranoid belief that social services uses their powers over families to remove children unnecessarily, whip them out from under the parents' noses, and sell them into sexual slavery. That's basically what it's about. So everything that they do, once you look at it through that lens, it begins to make a little bit more sense. So, for instance, the Musa family, in which a number of children in that family were being violently abused by parents who believed that they were beating the devils out of them. And Belinda and Sabine and several of their friends, including Charlotte Ward, fought like demons to have those children returned to the parents. There have been other cases as well. The Vicky Haig case, for example, in which a mother taught her child to make allegations of child sexual abuse to the family court in order to ensure that the mother could keep custody of the child. Shades of Hempstead, but a few years earlier. The Melissa Laird case, in which a mother was keeping her child in horrifically dangerous and filthy conditions. With the child was found with dog bites all over him. And Belinda and Sabine were determined that the child should be returned to the mother. Now, one thing that you'll probably know about the Association of McKenzie Friends is that they have never won a case, which makes you really think, why are they doing this then? They're clearly terrible failures at getting their way in court, but that's because that's not their goal. They don't care if they win or lose. What they care about is getting the word out there to the public so that they can basically make political hay over material of the family courts and basically mining people's lives to meet their own agendas. So now we come up to 2014, and the Hampstead case is on the horizon. At this point, Belinda is a little bit in the background. She doesn't play the same sort of front role that Sabine did. She was not the person who put the videos online, for example. However, she was playing a role in the background, and she seems to have been supporting Ella in court. She claims that she put forward a judicial review complaint, and I've heard from another person that this was not true because, again, she didn't know how to do that. However, that is what Belinda says she did. And then she seemed to play a role of something between a financier and a cheerleader in the Hampstead case, where Sabine ran off to Germany because she was quite rightly afraid she was going to be arrested for having put the videos up and then refusing to give material back to the local council. And Belinda basically stayed behind to talk to everyone about the Hampstead case, to be present at the church demonstrations, and basically to be the touch point in England of the case, which had kind of fallen apart in many ways, with Belinda off in Germany and Ella buggered off to Spain. So it's at this point that the videos were made, in which you'll see Belinda standing outside the Royal Courts of Justice, kind of holding court with various different people coming up to her and offering support and oh, isn't this all terrible? And, you'll see Abraham Christie comes up and trying to look respectable with his hair all slicked back and wearing a nice coat and everything, with not his usual attire, let's just say. And various different people, come to visit, and she's got signage all over the place, and it's really a big thing, and she is at the center of it. There are people coming up to interview her. She's the one who claims to know what's going on inside the courts, and yet, funnily enough, on the day that the judgment came down, she was outside complaining bitterly about how the secret family courts weren't allowing anyone inside, and it turned out that the judgment had been made in public, and in fact people had been allowed into the court. Belinda just hadn't bothered to find out that that was the case. So it was at around this time, in the spring of 2015, that Belinda set up something called the Knight Foundation. Now, the Knight Foundation was not what it seemed. As a foundation, you'd think that it would be a charity of some sort, but in fact, it was a privately owned business, and it was basically a way to funnel money to Sabine, who was living in Germany. Her funding had been cut off by the council because she was out of the country. And so Belinda needed some way to get money to her. So she set up this Knight Foundation. Now, interestingly, she claimed that it was because knights in armor coming to save the day and all that stuff. But as it turned out, she named the foundation for a person named Christopher Xavier Knight. It would not be until 3 or 4 years later that we learned that Christopher Knight actually is a convicted sex offender in the state of Florida. Of course, this wasn't the only problem with the Knight Foundation. In July 2015, the Ham and High newspaper in Hampstead and Highgate did an investigation of the Knight Foundation and, of course, discovered that it was not, as it claimed, a charity. And there's a very interesting article. I'll just read part of it to you here from that summer's edition. The Charities Commission is investigating claims that a Highgate-based organization has been masquerading as a charity, including revelations that it sent almost all its donations to a fugitive wanted for questioning by police. An investigation by the Ham and High has discovered that a company claiming to raise money to help protect children from sexual abuse had been misleading potential donors as part of a drive to raise £1 million, pounds rather, sorry, that's misread there. The Knight Foundation, set up in February of 2014, said the money would go towards helping fight cruelty against children and satanic ritual abuse. But the Ham and High has discovered that the organization is not registered with the government watchdog, the Charities Commission, and that almost all of the donations received are being sent to Sabine McNeill, a wanted fugitive wanted for questioning by the UK police. Her colleague, Belinda McKenzie, one of the directors of the Knight Foundation, has been leading the donation drive from her home in Priory Gardens, Highgate. The 69-year-old told the Ham and High, "We are aiming to become a charity and are at the early stages of the organization. I see our work as charitable as it's helping others, including my friend Sabine, who has had to leave the UK or face arrest. She needs financial support for her work, speaking to MEPs about child abuse in the UK. But I will consider amending the wording on our website." Actually, I don't think the summer of 2015 will go down in Belinda's mind as her finest hour. At the beginning of August, she and Tracy Morris attended Ella Draper's appeal hearings at the Royal Courts of Justice, and they were both issued with gagging orders, which prevented them from talking about the Hampstead case or from claiming that people had been involved with it and naming them and so forth. Belinda actually made a rather melodramatic video of herself saying that she had to leave the country because she was about to be arrested and people were probably going to try and kill her and all sorts of exciting things. And then about 2 months later, in October of 2015, she put up another post saying, "Oh, gee, looks like the heat is off," so she came back. So apparently she's one of the things that really motivates Belinda, apparently, is her fear of being arrested. And this is the fact that she never has been arrested is probably one of the things that contributes to the belief, people calling her Teflon Belinda, but it also contributes to the belief that she is somehow involved in some sort of secret service and is protected or doesn't have to face the consequences of her actions. However, we do know that Belinda has been arrested on at least 2 occasions. The first time was in the spring of 2017, and she made a bit of a fuss about it on a comment under an SGT report video. Basically, it sounded as though maybe she'd been into the wine a little bit, and she was kind of ranting and talking about how she had been arrested. Came as a surprise to everyone that I knew, because no one had heard anything about it. And usually when this kind of thing happened, we'd at least get wind of it, because basically people are very, very bad at keeping that kind of secret. The second time Belinda was arrested was at the Southwark Crown Court trial of Sabine McNeill in December 2018. I happened to be in the room when that actually happened, and the look on her face, the look of utter terror, was almost enough to make me feel sorry for her. Almost, not quite. She was brought to the dock, made to stand in the dock, while the judge basically told her what she had told us 2 days previously, which was that no one was to mention the name of any of the witnesses in this trial who would be under the protection of a reporting restriction. And I know that Belinda did this twice, because I read both of the posts that she did. One was an email and another was a Facebook post. In January, she was tried. They decided to wait until after Sabine's trial was finished, and she was convicted and received a 6-month sentence, suspended, I believe, for a year. It might have been 2 years, I'm not sure. And she had to sign a document stating that she was never going to discuss the contents of the Hampstead hoax in public again, which I believe she did. The reason I know that she's terrified of being arrested is, again, as I say, the absolute and utter horror on her face. And then she began just dithering. She was like flapping her arms and just like, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do." I mean, I'd be upset if I were arrested. I would try not to do something that would get myself arrested, but I'd be upset if I were. I don't know if I would completely lose it as much as she did. And this is what makes me think that the Teflon Belinda thing is basically because Belinda has an amazing ability to get other people to do her dirty work for her. So they get arrested and she goes sailing off into the sunset, happy as a clam, because she gets to say that, "Oh, well, I told her not to release those videos. I said it would be a bad idea," when, of course, she did nothing of the sort. That kind of thing. So that's how Belinda operates, and that's how I think she has managed to both escape any kind of major legal repercussions for her actions, and also to gain the sort of the reputation for being protected, or for possibly even being an agent of some sort. I don't think she is. I just think she's a very scared little person who wants other people to go to jail but not her. Another reason that I know that Belinda is very, very afraid of being arrested and having the consequences that may follow from that is that before her actual trial took place in January this year, she actually didn't show up to the first hearing, and basically sent a note via her barrister saying that she was suffering from dangerously high blood pressure and was waiting to see a doctor. So clearly, she was really scared shitless. And at one point, her barrister was heard in one of the little rooms that are next door to the courtrooms. Usually, they sort of have the courtroom might be here, and then they'd have a little room off to one side where witnesses would wait to go into the court. Anyway, the barrister was in there, and someone heard him shouting into the phone, "I'm telling you, you're not going to get 9 years," because of course her friend Sabine had just been given 9 years in prison, and clearly Belinda was terrified that she was going to have the same fate befall her. And so she actually eventually did show up and was required to bring a doctor's note. But I thought that little vignette kind of gave us a real look into what it is that motivates her. Basically, she wants to do the crime, but she doesn't want to do the time. That's, I think, maybe her motto. While we're on the topic of courts, I should say that I have met Belinda on 3 different occasions at 3 different trials. The first was the trial of Nilu and Sabine for witness intimidation in the summer of 2016. And the second was the trial of Rupert Quaintance, and that was in the summer of 2017. And then, of course, the Sabine trial this past year. In each of those cases, Belinda seems to kind of show up, and she has a kind of a gathering of little people who kind of come along with her, and they always seem to accompany her wherever she goes. At the Nilu and Sabine trial, she had bags of sandwiches that she was handing out to people at lunchtime, and it was almost as though she was kind of their pack leader or something. And these people were making all sorts of mischief in the courts. Belinda, of course, was above it all and said very little. But it was interesting because in the first trial, the Nilu and Sabine trial, it was a witness intimidation trial. So the people who were testifying were witnesses who had felt intimidated, and they wanted to be testifying from behind a screen, as was their right. Belinda, I heard she was sitting in front of me at that trial, and I leaned forward just in time at one point to hear her say to the person next to her, "Well, it could really be anyone behind that screen, couldn't it? It doesn't have to be the witness that they say it is." In other words, she's basically stirring up paranoia amongst her followers, and kind of putting out little whispers of rumors that the state is doing terrible things. And now I don't know why she would think that they would substitute some other witness behind a screen when you could tell from the person's voice exactly who they were. But that's how she seems to operate. It's this sense of there's always something to watch out for, and you have to be very, very careful, and the state is out to get you. One of the big questions, of course, with people like Belinda is, are they mad or are they bad? And honestly, it's really hard to tell sometimes. I have spoken to Belinda on a couple of occasions, not at any great length, but just briefly, and I've overheard her talking to her friends frequently, and quite often she can sound quite sane and normal, and then kind of slide off into this weird conspiracy land. But that doesn't necessarily mean that she has a mental illness. Now, I do know that there is at least one case of mental illness in her family. Her daughter apparently still lives at home and suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, which of course is a very, very difficult thing, not to be wished upon anyone. And I understand from conversations that have been repeated outside Belinda's home that Belinda has actually, on at least one occasion, advocated doing an exorcism with her daughter to rid her of the terrible spirits which have overtaken her. That kind of makes me think that perhaps things are not quite right upstairs in Belinda's little world. It's always hard to say, though, and you can never diagnose a person at a distance. I don't think that's a fair or a safe thing to do. I do think, though, that the rumors that she's MI5 or whatever, I think we can put those to one side. I also believe that she, as I said, she's very, very clever at getting other people to do her dirty work for her. And she's also kind of strangely paranoid and odd in some of her behaviors. Now, following her trial in January, we have heard really very little from Belinda, and that actually kind of makes sense because, she's not really allowed to be talking about the Hampstead hoax anymore. However, that doesn't mean she's disappeared. She's now working in the chambers of her barrister, the one who represented her at her trial, and that information about that has been actually sent to the Bar Standards Board. I'm hoping that at some point they will investigate that, because I believe that allowing a person like Belinda to be in charge of, as she's the office manager at this chambers, to be in charge of family law files, personal information about people, I think is highly, highly inappropriate. Especially given some of the material that she has been involved in and some of the agendas that she has tried to very publicly push. So we'll see if anything comes of that. And for now, she seems quiet and off to one side, so not really something to think about in terms of the Hampstead hoax any longer. But you never know. She's the kind of person who's a bit like a bad penny. She seems to pop up everywhere. And that's my take on Belinda. Hope it was helpful.